Welcome to Crying Inside, the channel where real family stories are told with all the pain, betrayal, and life lessons they bring. If this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe to become part of our community, because every week we share stories that remind us we're never alone in our struggles. Family should be the safest place. The people who raised us, who share our blood, should stand by us no matter what. But sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the very people we trust the most. And when that trust is broken, the pain cuts deeper than any words can describe. Today's story is about Allison Parker, a 7-year-old single mom living in Austin, Texas. She thought she had weathered the biggest storm of her life after a painful divorce. All Allison wanted was to raise her 9-year-old son Ethan with love and stability. But life was about to hit her with a shocking blow. When she walked into the courtroom to fight for custody, Allison expected her ex-husband to put up a tough fight. What she never expected was for her own mother to stand up and testify against her. Right in front of the judge, right in front of her son, her mother coldly said words that tore Allison's heart apart. She declared that her daughter couldn't hold down a job and wasn't capable of raising Ethan. What happened next turned the betrayal into a reality that everyone present in the courtroom that day would never forget. On a fall morning in 2022, the Austin sky carried a cool breeze, and leaves scattered on the steps outside Travis County Courthouse. Inside courtroom number 3, the bright white light from high-hanging lamps reflected off the wooden benches, making the atmosphere even tenser. People say courtrooms are always cold, not because of the air conditioning, but because this is where truths are uncovered, and family, friends, and bonds can shatter in minutes. Allison Parker sat at the defendant's table. She wore a simple white blouse under a navy blue blazer. Her hair is tied back neatly, her face so calm it seems like she's showing no emotion at all. But if you look closely, you can see her hands trembling slightly, her fingers intertwined to keep herself calm. Sitting a few rows ahead of her is her 9-year-old son, Ethan. The boy wears a plaid shirt, his small shoulders trembling with every breath. His dark eyes dart around the room, confused by why so many serious adults are discussing his own life. Then, a familiar voice, the one that used to lull her to sleep as a child and teach her to read the Bible every Sunday night, rings out. But this time, it lacks a mother's gentleness. It sounds like an accusation. "Your Honor, this girl couldn't even hold down a steady job. She's not worthy of raising my grandson." That's Margaret, Allison's birth mother, speaking. A woman in her 60s, her silver hair neatly pinned at the nape of her neck, sharp eyes, and a voice full of conviction. She stands straight at the witness stand, her hands trembling but firmly pointing at her daughter. The whole room seems to hold its breath. Ethan's eyes widen in disbelief that his grandmother just said that about his mother. Allison feels her body freeze. In that moment, she feels as if her own flesh and blood has driven a knife deep into her heart. David, her ex-husband, sits on the plaintiff's side. He leans back in his chair, the corners of his mouth curling into a victorious smile. Beside him is lawyer James Crawford, a man in an expensive suit, his calm face flashing with delight. They know a mother's words carry serious weight. No one understands a child better than their own parents. And when a mother publicly declares her daughter unfit to be a mother, what defense could possibly stand? Allison wants to speak up, to object, but her throat tightens. Every word from her mother's mouth feels like a stone thrown straight into her chest. She's not just denying Allison's right to be a mother, but also dismissing all the silent sacrifices and efforts she's made over the years. Allison's mind flashes back to sleepless nights spent reading files while watching over her child's sleep, rushed mornings dropping Ethan off at school, then dashing to the office. The times she quietly sat alone in the small apartment, trying to balance work and motherhood. No one in the family witnessed those moments. But now, the very woman who gave birth to her stands in court, turning all those efforts into nothing. Ethan bowed his head, his small hands gripping the edge of the chair tightly. The boy didn't know who to trust, Grandma or Mom. The woman who always brought candy on weekends, or the woman who held him close whenever there was a thunderstorm. His eyes welled up with tears, the confused look as if wanting to ask why. All Allison could see before her was David's triumphant face. The man who once vowed to stay by her side for life, but then betrayed and abandoned her, now using her own mother as a weapon against her. And Margaret, the mother who taught her to live honestly, is now becoming the witness destroying her own daughter. In that moment, Allison felt completely abandoned. On the other side was a whole army. David, his lawyer, his ex-in-laws filling the seats, all nodding in agreement. On her side were just a few close friends who took time off work to come support her. That imbalance made the large courtroom suddenly feel suffocating. Margaret's words echoed again, like a nail in a coffin. That girl is never stable. She could disappear at any moment, leaving her child alone. Ethan deserves a real home, with a successful, stable father and a family who knows how to care for him. That accusation felt like a sentence before the trial ended. People whispered, some eyes looking at Allison with a mix of pity and doubt. On Ethan's face, confusion turned into fear. Allison gently closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She knew this was not just a custody battle, but a fight to protect her dignity and to regain the trust of the child she loved more than life itself. And painfully, the one opposing her was the person who once held her in his arms and called her beloved daughter. In that cold room, Allison realized sometimes the greatest pain doesn't come from a broken marriage, but from the betrayal of family itself, and the feeling of being stabbed in the back she will never forget. Allison Parker was born in 1985, a small town in Texas. She grew up in a family that seemed normal on the outside, but inside held many cracks. Her father died young from a heart condition, leaving her mother, Margaret, to carry the weight for both of them. From a young age, Allison learned to be independent. She always worked hard to achieve top grades, not only to prove her worth, but also to escape her mother's harsh judgment. At 25, Allison graduated from law school and started her career in family law. This job gave her insight into all kinds of marriage stories, from tearful divorces to bitter custody battles. Many friends said Allison chose this profession as fate, since her own life later reflected similar tragedies. Allison was not the type of woman to show off. She lived simply in a modest apartment in downtown Austin. On regular days, she wore a white shirt, dark jeans, and worn-out flats. To many, that look was plain, even a bit sloppy. But for Allison, it was a deliberate choice. She didn't want attention, didn't want to be scrutinized. All she needed was peace to raise her son. After the divorce, Allison took full custody of Ethan. The boy was her lifeline, her reason to keep going. Ethan was just 9 years old, small in build, with bright, intelligent eyes and an innocent smile. Every morning, Ethan usually woke up early and sat at the table waiting for his mom to prepare breakfast. No matter how busy she was, Allison always made time to sit with him for at least 15 minutes before taking him to school. That was a precious moment they both cherished. Allison was strong, but not loud or flashy about it. She didn't boast about her achievements or complain about hardships. Outsiders only saw a quiet, reserved woman who kept her distance. Because of her reserved nature, many people, even close family members, misunderstood her. They thought she was a failure, unstable, and unreliable. But the truth is, Allison has been carrying more burdens than anyone else in the family ever knew. Her relationship with her birth mother was always a quiet wound. Margaret is a traditional woman who believes daughters should marry wealthy men and rely on a strong husband. She never understood why Allison chose a career path, dared to get a divorce, and tried to raise her child alone. In her eyes, Allison was a stubborn, headstrong, and failed daughter. Every time they met, Margaret never stopped criticizing her. She said Allison dressed like a cheap office worker, had no ability to keep a husband, and didn't know how to be a mother. Those words were like sharp thorns, hurting Allison deeply, but she chose to stay silent. Allison's younger brother, Brian, is 3 years her junior. Brian always sided with their mother. He believed their mother was the reasonable one, and his sister was just reckless. At family gatherings, Brian often avoided talking to Allison. If he did, it was only a few shallow, polite questions. To him, Allison was like an outsider. In that world, only Ethan was her sole comfort. The boy loved his mother with pure affection, always hugging her tightly whenever she came home late. Once Ethan asked, "Mom, why doesn't Grandma like you?" Allison choked up, hugged her son, and simply replied, "Everyone has their own way of thinking, but you just remember that Mom loves you the most." Late at night, when Ethan was already sound asleep, Allison often sat by the apartment window, looking at the city lights flickering. She wondered why she always had to prove herself to her own blood relatives. She worked hard, carried many responsibilities, but in their eyes, she was always just a failure who couldn't hold down a job. Yet Allison never let that contempt break her. She chose to stay silent and keep moving forward. For her, the most important thing wasn't family approval, but that Ethan grows up surrounded by love and learns the true value of patience and integrity. And then, it was her private nature and simple lifestyle that made everyone, even her own mother, completely unaware that she held a prestigious position in the legal field. Allison kept that truth carefully hidden, not out of shame, but to protect her son from pressure and society's scrutiny. But that very secret would, on a fateful day at the Travis County Courthouse, become a double-edged sword. On one side was the pain from family betrayal, on the other, the chance for Allison to prove her true self to the whole world. To better understand why Allison always felt out of place in her own family, we need to look back at seemingly ordinary moments in American life that carried deep wounds. Last Thanksgiving, the whole family gathered at Margaret's spacious home in the Austin suburbs. The smell of roasted turkey filled the kitchen. The dining table was elegantly set with yellow linens and scented candles. Traditional dishes like mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, and cranberry sauce were all carefully prepared. Allison brought a tray of apple pies, which she had hurriedly bought from a nearby store after working late into the night. As soon as she set the tray down, Margaret frowned. "Honey, you could have at least made something nice. Buying something last minute from the supermarket isn't heartfelt." That comment was said in front of everyone, leaving Allison feeling choked up. Ethan sat beside her, head down, clearly sensing his mother's embarrassment. Another vivid memory for Ethan was an afternoon when he was compared by David's paternal grandparents to a child the same age, the stepchild of David's new wife. At a family gathering, they praised that child for being a good student, playing piano, and dressing well. Then they looked at Ethan with pity. "That Allison girl probably can't even afford extra tutoring for Ethan." That seemingly casual remark brought Ethan to tears. He clung tightly to his mother and tearfully asked, "Mom, am I not as good as the others?" Allison could only hold him close, heart aching, but forced a reassuring smile. In everyday life, Allison also tried to fit in like any other American family. Once, the neighborhood held a backyard BBQ on Labor Day. Neighbors gathered, kids ran around the lawn, the smell of grilled meat mixed with lively laughter and chatter. Allison brought Ethan to attend, carrying a simple tray of mixed green salad. While other families showed off elaborate dishes, Allison quietly sat in a corner, chatting with a few close acquaintances. Ethan happily ran around with the other kids, but Allison knew well that the whispering comparisons were always there. On Sunday mornings, the church bells echoed throughout the neighborhood. Margaret always took pride in attending formal services with Brian and his family, while Allison was often absent. It wasn't because she didn't believe in God, but because work often forced her to be away on weekends. Margaret never understood that reason. She only saw her daughter missing important family occasions and would blame her, "You never respect tradition." Ethan had often wished his mom would come to his school birthday party. One year, Allison tried her best to arrange work and brought a chocolate cake to the class, watching her son beam as his friends sang to him. But some years, Allison couldn't be there. The boy blew out the candles feeling disappointed, forcing a smile when friends asked, "Where's your mom?" Each time, Allison tormented herself, wishing she could split in two to fulfill both her work duties and her role as a mother. These small details, seemingly minor in American family life, added up to a picture full of pressure. To outsiders, Allison was a frequently absent, flawed mother who didn't measure up to other women in the family. But only Ethan understood how hard she tried to make it up to him. And it was from these moments that the gap between Allison and her biological family grew wider and wider. The Denver District Courtroom buzzed with whispers as Helen Carter, Emily's mother, stood again at the witness stand. Her voice was clear and deliberate, each word ringing out as if long rehearsed. "This girl is unemployed, without a stable job. She can't even afford books and new clothes for her son. Your Honor, my granddaughter cannot grow up in such a poor and deprived environment." Emily sat at the defendant's table, back straight, but hands clenched tightly under the table. Her mother's words choked her up. Not because those words were true, but because they came from the very person who once rocked the child to sleep and promised to protect her for life. In that moment, Emily felt like all the silent efforts she had made over the years were wiped away. On the other side, Michael Thompson, Emily's ex-husband, sat confidently with his arms crossed. He lived in the Denver suburbs, in a spacious two-story house with a lush green lawn. He had a stable job in finance, a steady income, and always bragged that his family could provide Noah with a bright future. Sitting behind Michael were his parents and siblings, a whole row of relatives nodding in agreement at every word Mrs. Helen said. "Meanwhile," Mrs. Helen continued, her voice growing stronger, "Michael has a home in the suburbs, a solid job, and a family ready to support him. My grandson needs a real home, a place with true stability and love." Some people shook their heads sadly, looking toward Emily, while others whispered that the judge would definitely side with Michael. Those looks made Emily feel like a stranger, in the very courtroom deciding her son's fate. Noah sat in the front row, his young face tense with worry. The boy pressed his lips together, trying to stay calm, but his eyes glistened with tears. When Emily's gaze found him, Noah quickly looked away, too afraid to meet his mother's eyes. That sight made Emily's heart ache painfully. Judge Patricia Lopez sat on the high bench, tapping her gavel lightly to maintain order. Her face was stern, showing no emotion, but her eyes carefully noted every detail. She knew each accusation in this room carried weight and would deeply impact a child's life. Michael's lawyer stood up, continuing Mrs. Helen's argument. "Your Honor, clearly Mrs. Helen, as the defendant's mother, understands her daughter's situation better than anyone. What she shared shows the defendant is incapable of providing a stable environment for young Noah. Meanwhile, my client, Mr. Michael Thompson, has everything necessary to care for and raise his son." She wanted to argue back, to stand up and shout that it was all lies, that her job wasn't unemployment but a responsibility few knew about. But she stayed silent, keeping calm. 15 years of experience in the legal field had taught her that impatience could ruin everything. Inside, Emily was a storm. She remembered the times Noah was sick, how she stayed up all night watching over his bed. She remembered snowy mornings when she still drove the old car to get him to school on time. She remembered every book, every piece of clothing she had saved up for to buy for him. None of that was seen by anyone in this room, and now it was being trampled on by her own mother's words. The courtroom atmosphere seemed to tilt in one direction. Those sitting with Michael's family were sure Emily would lose. A few local reporters in the room began taking quick notes, the smell of ink and newsprint mixed in the stifling air. Emily glanced at Noah. The boy kept his head down, his small hands gripping the edge of the chair tightly. At that moment, Emily felt more pain than any wound. Not because she feared losing the case, but because of the confused look in her son's eyes, the sad silence of a child who should have been protected from adult battles. And at that moment, Emily realized this fight wasn't just about custody. This was where she had to prove the truth about herself, show everyone who she was and what she had done all these years. But before reaching that moment, she had to endure the harshest humiliation from the one who gave her life. 2 years before today's trial, Emily Carter went through one of the toughest periods of her life. The broken marriage with Michael Thompson left many deep wounds in her heart. She not only lost a life partner, but also had to face raising Noah while everyone around doubted her ability. After the divorce, Emily lived with Noah in a small apartment in downtown Denver. That apartment was just over 70 square meters, with a living room combined with a kitchen and 2 small bedrooms. Many saw it as a symbol of failure. Helen Carter, Emily's biological mother, often made snide remarks whenever she came to visit. "Sweetheart, are you planning to raise my grandchild in this tiny matchbox? Others have garden houses and lawns, but you only have 4 walls and an old car out in the parking lot." She knew that no matter how much she explained, her mother would never understand. Helen always believed that a woman could only succeed by marrying a rich husband and living a life of financial support. In her eyes, Emily's choice to divorce was just proof of weakness and stubbornness. But what Helen didn't know, and never cared to find out, was that Emily still held an important, even noble job. She was a judge in the Colorado state court system, responsible for handling complex and sensitive cases. She kept this a secret not out of shame, but to protect Noah from scrutiny and social pressure. She wanted her son to have a normal childhood, to go to school like other kids, not live under the heavy shadow of having a Supreme Court judge as a mom. However, this secrecy became an excuse for her family to criticize her. One winter evening during a family dinner, Daniel Carter, Emily's younger brother, couldn't hold back and bluntly said, "You haven't done anything worthwhile. Look at Michael, he has a stable career, a house, a car, and a happy family. And what about you? Divorced, unemployed, raising a child in hardship. I'm really ashamed to have a sister like you." She glanced at her mother, hoping for some sympathy, but only got a nod of agreement. In their eyes, Emily was just a failure, a burden that embarrassed them. From then on, Emily shared less and less about her life. She stopped telling her family about what was happening at the court, no longer mentioned the tense nights or the tough cases she had to decide on. She withdrew, choosing to stay silent whenever questioned. Helen and Daniel became more convinced that their daughter and sister was just avoiding reality. Once, at a Christmas party at their mother's house, Helen sighed loudly in front of everyone. Emily really doesn't think about the future. She keeps hiding what she calls her job. No one ever sees her going to work or bringing home any money. I'm afraid she's involved in something shady. Those words made the relatives look at Emily with suspicion. Emily just forced a smile, then made an excuse to take Noah home early. On the way back, Noah sat silently in the back seat, his face sad. The boy quietly asked, "Mom, why does Grandma always dislike you?" Emily held back tears and gently replied, "She doesn't hate me, she just doesn't understand me. Don't worry about it, just remember that I love you more than anything." Those misunderstandings piled up over the years. The more private Emily became, the more distant her family grew. They never saw her quiet sacrifices, never felt the hardships she went through. In their eyes, Michael was the successful man, while Emily was just a faded shadow. Then one day, those prejudices turned into weapons against her right in the courtroom. Emily had hoped that at least her mother would stand by her, that maternal love would never betray her. But reality was harsher. Helen chose her former son-in-law over her own daughter, trusting appearances of stability rather than the strength and heart of her own child. That was the biggest conflict, the root of all the pain Emily faced in the custody trial for Noah. The tension in the courtroom grew thicker. After Helen Carter finished her testimony, Michael's lawyer, James Crawford, calmly stood up. He adjusted his tie, held a thick file in his hands, and stepped up to the stand. His voice was steady and firm, each sentence hitting Emily's image like a hammer blow. "Your Honor," James began, "we have heard the witness Helen Carter, the defendant's mother, assert that Emily Carter is incapable of caring for and raising her son. But that's not all. We also have additional evidence showing that she lives a secretive life, is not transparent about her work, and may even be involved in illegal activities." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Some people on Michael's side nodded, showing absolute trust. Emily sat still, her hands neatly folded on the table, her eyes calm yet profound. James continued, this time holding up a stack of color photos. "Your Honor, please take a look at these pictures. These show important events in young Noah's life over the past 2 years. Elementary school graduation, his 8th birthday party, a piano recital at school, and even the Christmas service at church. Your Honor, in all these moments, the mother is nowhere to be seen. Noah is there, the father is there, both sides of the family are there, but the child's mother is not. Where is she? No one knows. She always disappears at the most important moments in her son's life." Everyone in the courtroom turned their eyes in that direction. The photos showed Noah standing next to his father and grandparents, trying to smile but with sad eyes. Not a single picture had Emily by his side. To those unaware of the truth, these photos painted the picture of an irresponsible mother, absent during her child's most significant moments. James turned to Judge Patricia Lopez, his voice firm and clear. "Your Honor, a mother who is consistently absent from her son's life, who lives in secrecy, never discloses her occupation, never lets the family know what she's doing, shows a serious lack of stability. A child needs love and presence, not empty promises. We believe granting custody of Noah to his father is the most reasonable and safest choice." A few whispered, "She's definitely hiding something, maybe involved in something shady." She knew those photos carried weight. She knew every absence left a scar in Noah's heart, but only she understood why. She wasn't absent out of irresponsibility, but because she had spent countless nights in the courtroom, reading through case files and making decisions about the lives of hundreds of people. But that was something neither her mother nor Michael ever wanted to know. They never asked, never cared, and now they turned that silence into a weapon to bring her down. Noah sat in the front row, his eyes brimming with tears. When he saw the photos being held up, he lowered his head. Emily's heart tightened. She wanted to rush over and hug him, to tell him she never abandoned him, that every time she was absent it was because she was protecting other children. but she had to hold back her emotions. This wasn't the time for her to speak up. Helen sat behind Michael, her face beaming with the belief that she had done the right thing. She held her head high, as if the accusations were proof of her own wisdom. Daniel, Emily's younger brother, also shook his head with a sigh, as if to say he'd always thought his sister was worthless. The courtroom atmosphere was clearly tipping to one side. Everyone began to look at Emily as the loser. Her silence only made them believe she had nothing to defend herself with. But inside, Emily was far from defeated. She knew the truth. She knew the moment to reveal everything hadn't come yet. And 15 years of legal experience had taught her that sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. Let the other side speak. Let them trap themselves with their own accusations. And when the truth is finally uncovered, the whole room will be stunned. Emily sat still, her eyes bright but calm. Everyone thought she had failed, but at this moment she was preparing for the biggest turning point of her life. The gavel struck once again to silence the murmurs in the courtroom, but the tension remained thick. Helen Carter stood at the witness stand, her face full of confidence. She cleared her throat, then spoke with certainty, as if defending the truth. "I don't want my nephew to grow up in hardship. A child needs a real home, a complete family. Emily cannot provide that for Noah." Her words hit Emily's heart like an arrow. The room buzzed with whispers, some nodding in agreement. People whispered to each other, their eyes slowly turning toward her. The image of Emily, a single mother sitting at the defendant's table, made the accusations feel even more convincing. Behind Michael, his whole family showed clear satisfaction. They whispered, occasionally smiling at each other as if victory was already in their hands. Michael still sat there, arms crossed, the corner of his mouth curling into a cold smile. On the opposite side, Emily's row was almost empty. Only a few close friends had taken time off work to be there. They sat close together, worried eyes, hands tightly clasped as the accusations kept coming down. A close college friend shook her head softly, whispering to the person beside her, "I can't believe a mother would stand against her own daughter like this." But their voices were so low no one else could hear. Emily turned to look at Noah. The boy sat in the front row, small and fragile amid the solemn courtroom atmosphere. His dark eyes were wide open, scanning from one person to another, then stopping at his grandmother, bad-mouthing his mother. When Emily tried to catch his gaze, Noah awkwardly looked away, his tiny hands gripping the edge of the bench. The tear sliding down his young cheek made Emily's heart ache. In that moment, Emily recalled a night not long ago. Back then, Noah had asked, "Mom, why does Grandma never like you?" Emily held him close and whispered, "She thinks differently, but don't worry. The important thing is, I'm always here for you." Now, that promise felt shaken as the child witnessed his grandmother turn against his mother. Helen continued, her voice growing firmer, as if each word was a nail in Emily's coffin. "I've watched my daughter grow up. She's never been stable, sometimes working here, sometimes disappearing without a trace. How can a mother like that raise a child properly? Noah needs safety. He needs to grow up in a family with a father." With grandparents always by his side, whispering rose again. Some people near Michael's family nodded openly. Someone even whispered, "She's right. The child needs stability. He can't grow up with a mother like that." Emily sat still, her eyes fixed straight on the witness stand. Inside, her heart twisted in pain, but her face remained calm. She knew well that anger now would only become evidence against herself. Years of experience as a lawyer taught her that sometimes you have to be patient and let the other side expose their baseless accusations. Noah hung his head low. Emily saw his shoulders tremble. Then a second tear rolled down. That scene made her want to jump up and run to hold him, to reassure him that all those words were wrong, that his mother never abandoned him. But she was tied to her seat because this was a courtroom where all emotions must be held back behind cold walls. Friends behind her couldn't hide their worry. Someone whispered, "She has to do something. Sitting so still like this, she's losing." But Emily stayed silent, her eyes bright, but lips pressed tight. Helen lowered her voice, ending her testimony with a firm, final sentence. "I love my grandson, and because I love him, I have to protect him from an unfit mother. I don't want Noah to grow up in instability, in deprivation, in irresponsibility." The courtroom filled with noise like crashing waves. Most of the witnesses nodded in agreement. Others whispered that the case was clear. Michael couldn't even hide his triumphant smile. He quietly turned around, glancing at Emily with a challenging look. Emily didn't respond. She just bowed her head, took a deep breath. To everyone, it probably looked like the posture of a loser, a powerless mother. But only she knew that silence was not surrender. It was the beginning of a counterattack that would shake the entire room. After nearly an hour of continuous accusations, the courtroom became more suffocating than ever. The atmosphere seemed to strongly favor Michael Thompson and his family. People whispered that Emily Carter would surely lose custody. Judge Patricia Lopez sat sternly on the high bench. Her sharp gaze swept across the courtroom. She looked at Emily, her voice lowering but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Miss Carter, do you have any response to the accusations just made?" The entire courtroom held its breath. All eyes turned to Emily. Many expected her to cry, or quickly defend herself. But Emily remained still for a moment, as if carefully weighing her next move. Then she slowly stood up, standing tall, her eyes bright yet calm. "Your Honor," Emily's voice rang out clearly and calmly, "I would like to call a witness." The courtroom immediately erupted. Murmurs rose like crashing waves. "No prior notice of any witness. What's going on? What's she trying to pull?" Some family members of Michael whispered mockingly, convinced Emily was just stalling. Michael's lawyer quickly stood up, his tone full of objection. "Your Honor, the defense has not registered any witnesses. This is a violation of procedural rules." Emily turned to look, her voice still calm. "This witness only became available this morning. I believe his testimony will clarify all doubts about my work and personal life." The room seemed to explode with curiosity. Who could Emily possibly call at such a crucial moment? Judge Lopez frowned slightly, then lightly tapped her gavel on the desk. "Order! I will allow the defense to call the witness. Please proceed." Emily took a deep breath, then slowly walked toward the courtroom door. Each step echoed loudly in the silent room. She placed her hand on the large wooden door and pulled it open. Light spilled in from outside, and at that moment, a tall figure appeared. A man in a sharp black suit entered, his silver hair neatly combed, walking with a dignified but confident stride. The courtroom gasped in unison, many unable to believe their eyes. Emily turned back, her voice strong, low, and commanding. "Your Honor, I present my witness. Chief Justice Richard Coleman, Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court." The sound of astonishment echoed throughout the room. Some people gaped in shock. Others covered their mouths with their hands in surprise. A few reporters immediately started frantically taking notes, cameras flashing nonstop. Helen Carter, the mother who had confidently accused her daughter, sat frozen in silence. The color drained from her face, leaving only paleness and shock. She gripped the edge of her chair tightly, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Michael Thompson, Emily's ex-husband, also showed clear signs of shock. His face stiffened, and his smug smile vanished in an instant. He turned to lawyer James Crawford, but even the seasoned attorney was stunned, eyes wide, hands flipping through files frantically, as if searching for a way to respond. Chief Justice Coleman stepped up to the witness stand, his every step radiating authority. No introduction was needed. Most people in the courtroom recognized him instantly. This man was not only the state's supreme judge, but also one of the most powerful and respected figures in the legal system. Emily turned back to the defendant's table, looking more confident than ever. Now, she was no longer the lone woman backed into a corner. She held the strongest card in the game. The atmosphere in the courtroom was so heavy you could almost hear hearts pounding. Noah sat in the front row, his eyes wide with amazement. The boy looked at his mother, then at the Chief Justice entering the room, feeling a surge of pride he had never known before. Judge Lopez kept a calm expression, but her eyes flashed with surprise. She nodded slightly, signaling Chief Justice Coleman to take the stand. "Please call the witness." Helen sat silently, her lips moving but unable to speak. Everything she had said about her daughter being unemployed, irresponsible, and unfit to raise a child was collapsing in this very moment. Michael adjusted his tie, trying to regain his composure, but sweat was already beading on his forehead. He knew the game he thought he had won could completely flip in just a few minutes. Emily stood tall, her gaze calm but shining with unwavering confidence. She looked straight at her mother, then at Michael, and finally at her son. Noah is looking at her with a mix of surprise and pride in his eyes. The boy's tears are still rolling down his cheeks, but his smile is starting to break through. In that moment, Emily understood that the truth was about to be revealed. And for the first time during the entire trial, she regained control of the situation. Chief Justice Richard Coleman stepped up to the witness stand, his face calm but radiating the authority of someone who has spent many years at the top of the state judiciary. The courtroom fell completely silent, every eye fixed on the tall figure. Judge Patricia Lopez nodded slightly. "Please introduce yourself." Coleman's voice rang out, deep and decisive. "My name is Richard Coleman. I am the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court. I am here today to clarify the identity and qualifications of Emily Carter." A murmur spread through the courtroom. People leaned closer to each other, whispering, unable to believe what they were hearing. Emily, the woman who was looked down upon and accused of being unemployed by her own mother, was now being vouched for by the Chief Justice himself. Coleman turned toward Emily, then directed his gaze at Judge Lopez. "Your Honor, Emily Carter is not unemployed, nor is she an irresponsible mother. She is one of the most outstanding judges I have ever had the opportunity to work with. For the past 8 years, Judge Carter has served on the Texas Supreme Court as an Associate Justice, directly handling and ruling on hundreds of important cases, ranging from civil and criminal to child rights and death penalty appeals. She is widely recognized throughout the judiciary for her integrity, intelligence, and compassion." The courtroom burst into amazed gasps. Helen Carter sat frozen, her lips trembling, her face pale. Michael Thompson also showed clear signs of shock, his eyes glazing over as if all his advantages had been stripped away. Coleman continued, his voice echoing throughout the room. "Regarding her financial situation, Emily Carter earns an annual salary of $195,000, along with full benefits. She owns a penthouse apartment in downtown Denver and a vacation home in the Colorado mountains. All of her assets and income are publicly disclosed in the transparent records as required by the Justice Department." Once again, the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. The accusations that Emily lived in poverty, unable to provide for her child, instantly turned into a joke. The sarcastic remarks about her small apartment and old car were now revealed to be her deliberate choices to protect Noah from prying eyes. Emily sat still, her face calm, but her eyes shone with pride. She had stayed silent for too long, endured so much criticism, and now the truth was out in the open. Noah sat in the front row, his eyes bright and shining. For the first time, he understood why his mom was always busy, why she often missed school events, and why some nights she locked herself in her office until late. It wasn't because she was abandoning him, but because she carried the responsibility of thousands of families making decisions to protect justice. Tears still glistened on his cheeks, but in those young eyes was a pride he had never felt before. Lawyer James Crawford flipped through the files in his hand, sweat beading on his forehead. He stammered, "Your Honor, but my client had no knowledge." Coleman cut him off sternly. "No knowledge, or unwilling to know. A husband living with his wife for 6 years, but never bothered to care about her work. That's neglect, not Emily's fault. And that is certainly not a reason to take away the custody rights of a devoted mother." Judge Lopez listened intently, her gaze softening as she looked at Emily. Clearly, the scales in her mind had begun to tip decisively to one side. Helen sat behind, her hands clenched tightly, her nails digging into her skin. Her face was creased, her eyes filled with panic. The passionate accusations she had just made were now evidence against herself, turning her into a mother who cruelly gave false testimony against her own daughter. Michael hung his head low, his whole body stiffening. The man who once confidently believed he had the upper hand was now nothing but a failure, exposed for his carelessness and irresponsibility in his own marriage. Meanwhile, Noah couldn't take his eyes off his mother. The boy whispered softly, just loud enough for the person nearby to hear, "Mom, I'm proud of you." Emily turned around, her eyes welling up, gently nodding at him. In that moment, all the sacrifices, all the loneliness she had endured, were finally rewarded. Coleman ended his opening statement with a sentence that silenced the whole room. To say that Emily Carter is unfit to raise her child is an insult to the thousands of families she has protected throughout her career. She is not only a great mother, but also one of the strongest and most respectable women I have ever known. The entire room fell into silence. No one dared to whisper, no one dared to sneer. Everyone's eyes turned to Emily, who was no longer the lonely, oppressed woman, but a judge who had proven the truth through her career and character. All the accusations crumbled in that moment. Every bit of contempt turned into respect. And for the first time during the entire trial, Emily felt truly recognized for her worth. The courtroom remained silent after Chief Judge Richard Coleman finished his testimony. The atmosphere was so heavy you could hear a pen drop. No one had yet recovered from the fact that Emily Carter, accused of being unemployed and irresponsible, was actually one of the state's highest-ranking judges. Lawyer James Crawford stood still, flipping through the file meaninglessly. Michael Thompson was sweating profusely, face flushed, eyes unfocused. Judge Lopez stared at him for a moment, then coldly asked, "Mr. Thompson, did you really not know your wife's occupation throughout your marriage?" Michael swallowed hard, clasped his hands on the table, and replied shakily, I just thought she was a court clerk. I never imagined Emily was a Supreme Court judge." Gasps of surprise echoed throughout the courtroom. Some laughed mockingly, others shook their heads in disbelief. A man who lived with his wife for 6 years without knowing she held one of the most powerful positions in the judicial system. That not only showed carelessness, but also proved he never truly cared about the life and work of the woman he shared his bed with. Emily lifted her head, eyes calm but deep. "Yes, Your Honor. I never clearly explained my job to my family, not even to Michael. The simple reason was that I wanted my son Noah to have a normal childhood. I don't want my son to be the center of attention just because his mom is a judge. I want him to go to school, play ball, and make friends with other kids without carrying the label, son of a Supreme Court judge." She paused for a moment, her eyes turning toward Noah. "I choose to live simply, drive an old car, and live in a modest apartment because I want my son to learn the value of hard work and humility. I don't want him to think everything in life is handed to him just because his mom has status." Noah looked up, his eyes shining bright. The boy seemed to understand, for the first time grasping the full meaning behind his mother's silence. Judge Lopez nodded gently, a flicker of respect in her eyes, then turned to Lawyer Crawford. "Do you have anything to add?" The lawyer sighed and shook his head. "No, Your Honor." But unexpectedly, Emily slowly stood up, holding a thin file. Her voice rang out clearly. "Your Honor, I would like to submit additional independent evidence. This is a psychological report and parenting evaluation conducted by Dr. Sandra Williams, a psychologist appointed by the court." She handed the file to the clerk, who then passed it to the judge's bench. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs again. Judge Lopez quickly flipped through the first pages, her eyes stopping at the bolded sections. Then she read aloud, "In this report, Dr. Sandra Williams concludes that Miss Emily Carter is an exemplary parent. She has a deep emotional bond with her son and always prioritizes his development and happiness. There is no indication of neglect, abuse, or irresponsibility. On the contrary, Miss Carter is assessed as having excellent parenting skills, balancing work and childcare effectively." The courtroom almost fell silent. No more mocking laughter, no more nodding in agreement. Instead, there was a heavy silence and awkward glances exchanged. Helen Carter, Emily's mother, sat in the back, her hands trembling uncontrollably. The powerful accusations she had just made were now torn apart by scientific and objective evidence. She lowered her head, avoiding everyone's gaze, especially her daughter's. Emily lifted her head, speaking slowly but firmly. "Over the years, I have done everything possible to nurture and protect my son. There were times I had to be absent, times I couldn't attend Noah's events. But the reason was because I was doing a job entrusted to me by the entire state, protecting justice and the safety of thousands of other kids. That is not irresponsibility. It's sacrifice. And my son knows that no matter how busy I am, my love for him has never changed." Noah broke down in tears, this time not out of confusion or fear, but moved. The boy jumped up, ran to hug his mother tight, ignoring the people in the courtroom watching. "I'm sorry, Mom," he sobbed. "I used to think you didn't love me, but now I understand." Emily held him, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she still smiled. "No, Noah, I've always loved you. Everything I do is for you." In that moment, the whole room fell completely silent. Even Michael didn't dare to lift his head. The truth was crystal clear. He had never cared about his wife's work throughout their 6 years together. He never asked, never tried to understand, just assumed Emily was an ordinary court employee. And now, all that indifference had made him a public laughingstock. Judge Lopez struck the gavel, declaring, "The evidence and testimonies have clarified many things. The image of an irresponsible mother has completely fallen apart. On the contrary, we see here a woman who has sacrificed, devoted herself, and is an exemplary parent." In the courtroom, no one dared to whisper anymore. Everyone was silent, as if witnessing a historic moment. Emily looked at her mother. Helen was still sitting there, hunched over, her eyes red. But this time, Emily no longer felt the same pain as before. Instead, there was a strange calmness. She knew that from now on, the distance between her and this mother had become an unfixable crack. As for Michael, his eyes were empty. All his preparations, every attack strategy, had completely collapsed. He not only lost the case, but was exposed as a careless husband and selfish father. And the second twist in the independent psychological report sealed all doubts, turning Emily from the accused into a symbol of truth and justice. Judge Patricia Lopez's gavel struck the table, the sound echoing like the closing of a stormy chapter. In the courtroom, the atmosphere seemed to shatter. No more noise, no more whispers. Everyone knew the victory belonged to Emily Carter, but the cost wasn't just winning custody, it was the emotional wounds that wouldn't heal overnight. Helen Carter sat in the back row, her eyes red, tears spilling uncontrollably. The once confident woman, who boldly claimed her daughter wasn't fit to raise a child now, trembled and broke down. She raised her hand to cover her face, her choked sobs echoing through the silent courtroom. "Honey, I was wrong. I didn't know. I'm sorry." But Emily didn't look back. She stood next to the defendant's table, her arm around Noah's shoulders, eyes fixed straight ahead. Her heart ached, but her lips pressed tightly together. She knew apologies now couldn't erase the pain her own mother had caused. Not only had she been betrayed, but her mother almost took her only child away with false testimony. That betrayal from the person who should have been her support hurt more than any attack from Michael ever could. Michael Thompson sat stunned, no longer looking victorious. When the judge awarded full custody of Noah to Emily, his face froze in disbelief. On top of that, the judge ordered Michael could only visit Noah under supervision and had to complete a 6-month co-parenting course before any wider visitation rights could be considered. All his ambitions to win Noah, all his plans to prove he was the ideal father, went up in smoke. Lawyer James Crawford sighed, gathering his files in confusion. He knew he had lost completely, not just because the other side was stronger, but because the truth was laid bare too clearly. Meanwhile, Noah held his mother tightly. The boy rested his head on Emily's shoulder, his voice trembling but full of emotion. "Mom, you're amazing, the most amazing mom." Those simple words brought tears to Emily's eyes this time, not tears of pain, but of release. All the sacrifices, all the silence, were finally understood by her little son. Emily bent down, lightly kissed Noah's messy hair. "Noah, you are the reason I stay strong. Everything I do is for you." The audience gradually started to leave. Michael's family quietly withdrew. No one dared to look back. A few reporters stayed behind, jotting down the final lines, their camera flashes going off repeatedly. In their eyes, Emily was not just a mother fighting for justice for herself, but a symbol of integrity and resilience for women. Helen remained seated, trembling and weeping. She watched her daughter and granddaughter embrace, but didn't dare to approach. Every step now felt like an abyss separating them. Inside her, regret surged, but it was already too late. Emily felt a heavy weight in her heart. Today's victory didn't bring complete joy. She realized a bitter truth. Betrayal by family hurts more than any attack from an ex-husband. Michael could use lawyers, fabricate accusations, but she was prepared for that. But her mother, who was supposed to be her support, had turned into a knife, stabbing straight into her heart. That wound, Emily knew, would never fully heal. Noah looked up, eyes clear. "Mom, you won't ever leave me again, right?" Emily smiled gently, wiping away his tears. "No, I'll always be by your side. But you need to understand. Sometimes Mom has to work, and that job is to protect other kids just like you. I hope you'll be proud, not feel abandoned." Noah nodded, tightening his arms around his mom. "I'm proud. I promise." A phone rang in the corner. then was quickly silenced. The courtroom was nearly empty. Emily led Noah out, walking slowly but with purpose. Each step marked a milestone, proving she had reclaimed the most important thing in her life. Outside, the late autumn sun shone golden, lighting up the courthouse steps. Emily stopped and took a deep breath. The wind was chilly, but inside her burned a warm fire. Noah held his mother's hand tightly, his eyes shining with pride. For Emily, this victory wasn't just legal. It was proof that the truth would finally be recognized, that a mother's love is stronger than any accusation. But at the same time, it was a wake-up call. Not every family member deserves absolute trust. And sometimes, it's the betrayal by those closest to you that leaves the deepest scars. Emily turned to Noah and smiled. In that moment, she knew that although the battle had been painful, she had won the most important thing, her son's heart. The trial ended with a clear verdict. Emily Carter was granted full custody and care of Noah. Michael Thompson was only allowed supervised visits and had to complete a 6-month co-parenting course before any further consideration. Judge Patricia Lopez's final gavel strike confirmed the victory of truth and justice. That day, leaving the courthouse, Emily felt like she had just been through the longest battle of her life. Beside her, Noah held her hand tightly, his eyes bright with pride. The boy kept looking up at his mother, as if to make sure this strong woman truly belonged to him forever. In the months that followed, Emily's life gradually settled into a new rhythm. She no longer had to hide her profession like before. At school, Noah proudly told his friends that his mom was the state's Supreme Court judge. The boy would proudly say, "Mom's a judge," and show his teachers the articles about his mom's important rulings. For Noah, the image of a mother who used to miss many events was replaced by that of a hero, both a mom and a defender of justice. At first, Emily was a bit worried, fearing her son would feel pressured by the attention around him. But Noah never saw it as a burden. On the contrary, he felt proud, and that made Emily feel more relieved than ever. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to live honestly, no more hiding or avoiding. Michael, after a heavy defeat in court, became quieter. 6 months of co-parenting classes changed him somewhat. He learned to listen, to spend time with his son without imposing or using him as a pawn in adult battles. Still, the trust between him and Emily was completely gone. When he picked Noah up for supervised visits, his eyes were full of regret, but Emily responded only with calmness. She didn't hold resentment, but she also had no hope left for any kind of reconciliation. Helen Carter, Emily's mother, wrote apology letters multiple times. In those letters, she said she was haunted by worries that her daughter wasn't capable enough, admitting she was too rigid to trust Emily. She begged to see her grandchild again. Emily read every word, her heart aching, but she never replied. The betrayal in the courtroom was still fresh, and she knew she wasn't ready to reopen that closed door. Still, Emily didn't let that pain turn her bitter. Instead, she chose to live more openly, spending more time with Noah. After school in the afternoons, she often picked him up to go to the park, eat ice cream, or simply stroll around the neighborhood. On weekends, instead of taking on extra work, Emily dedicated a whole day to cooking with her son, watching movies, or visiting museums. The moments she used to miss became precious memories they built together. Emily also changed at work. She no longer hid her role, and colleagues and friends were surprised to learn that the famous judge had chosen a simple life to protect her child. They showed her even more respect. Emily understood that being transparent no longer put Noah at a disadvantage, but helped him learn lessons about pride and integrity. Noah also matured after the ordeal. He was no longer angry at his mother for her absences. On the contrary, he often told his friends, "My mom helps other kids have better lives." Every time he said that, Emily felt a weight lifted from her heart. Every sacrifice, every hurt, finally had meaning. 6 months after the trial, Michael completed his course. He was allowed to visit his son more often, this time without strict supervision. Noah was happy to see his father, but always returned to his mother feeling completely safe. Michael had changed somewhat, but the scars in their parental relationship couldn't be erased. Emily understood that the only thing she could do was maintain balance, so Noah wouldn't get caught in old battles. Mornings, when Emily saw Noah off to school, he often turned back, waved, and shouted, "Bye, Mom, my judge mom," which made those around them laugh. Emily smiled, her heart full of pride. She was not just a judge, but a mother who fought to keep the most precious thing in her life. And in those quiet moments, Emily realized something. That painful battle not only brought legal victory, but also awakening. It taught her that the truth must be spoken, that love must be clearly shown, and that sometimes, to protect her child, a mother needs both toughness and the courage not to hide her own light. When the courtroom doors closed, Emily Carter knew that the hardest journey of her life had also come to an end. But what remained was not just a legal victory, but deep lessons about family, betrayal, and the value of integrity. For months, Emily wrestled with the moment her own mother, Helen, stood in court, pointed a finger, and said she didn't deserve to raise her child. It was a moment so painful it nearly destroyed her. Outsiders can attack, can doubt, but when family turns their backs, the wounds left are often deeper than any knife. Emily understood one bitter truth. Sometimes, the people closest to us cause the most pain. Yet, from that pain, she found another truth. People shouldn't hide their own light. For years, Emily chose to live in the shadows, not revealing her true role to protect Noah from pressure. But hiding the truth, unintentionally, gave others a reason to look down on her, made her mother believe her daughter was useless, and led her ex-husband to think she was just a weak, incapable woman. The moment she stood up and publicly claimed her identity and career, all accusations fell apart. Emily realized that when you step into the light with integrity, you not only protect yourself but also give your children pride and valuable life lessons. Noah learned that his mother didn't need to hide, and that truth and integrity are what really matter. In life, we often get caught up in fear of judgment, envy, or putting pressure on our children. But Emily proved that light is only truly strong when it's revealed. And in the end, integrity and truth will win. Not immediately, but surely, just like how justice smiled on her in court. Looking back, Emily knew she didn't need her mother's apology to move forward. She chose to forgive in her heart, but that didn't mean allowing anyone to repeat their mistakes. Forgiveness is to free yourself, not to give others permission to hurt you again. And the biggest message Emily wants to send to everyone is, stand up for the truth, believe in yourself, and never let anyone extinguish the light that belongs to you. Thank you for staying with Crying Inside until the final moments of today's story. This is not just the journey of Emily Carter and her son Noah, but also a reminder that any of us can face our most painful moments from within our own families. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like, share this video with those who might need it, and especially subscribe to Crying Inside to keep watching more heartfelt stories. Every story on this channel is told with complete sincerity, not just to bring sadness, but also to bring hope, strength, and lessons for us to grow together. Please leave a comment below and share your experiences or thoughts. Your words might just become a great source of encouragement for someone going through a tough time. And finally, let me close with a saying that Emily deeply felt after everything. Family can bring you down, but it can also be your greatest source of strength. What matters is how you choose to get back up.